Hey everyone, it's Tanner with the Gospel Proclamation again. Today I'm meeting brother Mike Washeck. And so Mike, tell us who you are, where you're from, where you're living now. I think you said you're part of or you've been part of a number of ecclesias in your life. Where are
Yeah,
you at
yeah.
now?
Well, we're currently in Powhatan, Virginia. We were in Denver up until the time I retired. Well, at least for 10 or 12 years. I can't remember now for sure. But when we retired, all of our family and grandkids were on the East Coast. So we thought, well, to make it easier to interact with the family, we'll move to Powhatan. But no, I was born in Wheaton, Missouri, which is a little farming community about 5 to 7 miles from my grandparent Washeck's had a farm, and we were living on the farm at the time. And Dad was building a house there. And when I was born in a doctor's office, I came quick. My mom wrote a story about how I came. They had been up till 2:30 in the morning working in the house trying to get things built up, and went to bed. And Mom woke up in labor, and 2 hours later, I was there. So they took me to Wheaton because there was a doctor's office there with a nurse on call, and the doctor was out of town. So the nurse delivered me. And I think Mom was probably discharged that same day to go back home because they didn't have all they had was exam rooms. They didn't have recovery rooms. So anyway, that's where I was born and lived in Wheaton, I think about a year to a year and a half. And then we moved to Wichita. So my earliest memories are of Wichita. But Dad, he had moved there to help Grandpa with the farming, but it didn't work out, and he abandoned the house. And it was there while your grandpa and all of the rest of that generation, we were kids growing up on the farm. The house was there for years and years, and then eventually it caught fire and burned down. But yeah, that was Dad's intent, was to we would have been raised as farmers, Pete and I, on the Washeck farm, but it just things went a different direction. But that's where I was born.
Yeah, I didn't realize it burned up. And
Yep.
we had a little bit of conversation before we started recording here, but you were born in a believing household, and
Yes.
tell me about like when you were growing up, how you interacted with the truth, how you were taught it, and kind of how you like. Did you always believe it? Did there ever come a point where you question it a whole lot? What was it like when you were younger?
Well, we lived a good number of years in isolation. We were part of the Carthage Ecclesia back in the day, but Pete made a mistake on his interview. We only really met once a month,
Hmm.
and every time we met was a potluck because we had people coming from Oklahoma, from Kansas, from Missouri, and collective group meeting together in Carthage. So that was a big part of my life. But my parents were really good about keeping us. We did our family readings every night. We went to Arkansas Bible School. That was the only Bible school I attended for probably the first 20 years of my life. And we had our Sunday school at home and we're taught. And so I think they did a good job in keeping us connected to the truth. And then my nature was such that I gravitated to it. It's like I told you before we started recording, I never had any other ambition but to come to the truth. And there were four of us kids, and all four of us did come into the truth. And
So
so,
when
but yeah, that's it. And those formative years, we lived in Wichita in isolation there. We lived in a little town called Lahara, Colorado. We were in isolation there because the Denver Ecclesia didn't even exist back then. And then in my own life, I think the only town I had to move to, well, Virginia is the eighth state that I've been a resident of.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well, our tribe of the Washeck clan were gypsies. I think Dad had gypsy blood in him because he moved around a lot when we were kids. And I've moved. Well, I counted up moves, Tanner, to show you how crazy we are. I counted all the houses from the time I left Missouri as an infant until moving to Powhatan. I've moved 38 times,
Oh my goodness. 30.
sometimes across the street, sometimes across town, sometimes across country. I've been a resident of 8 states. I've moved in and out of Colorado 5 times. I've moved in and out of Florida 4 times. I mean, it's just nuts.
So it's
Uh,
easy for you. I hate moving. There's a lot that goes into it. But when you're saying that, when you look back on your early years in the truth, is there a reason that you think or something that really helped you latch on to it? Like, did you have, was it just from your daily readings that you really latched on to it, or was it maybe individuals in your life that really served as good role models? Like, what was it that made you as a young person say, this is something I want to be a part of?
Well, the influence of going to Arkansas Bible School had a lot to do with it. I just loved being there. And I think Pete expressed the same thing. We look forward to that. I mean, going to Arkansas was the highlight of the year for me and him.
Mhm.
I suppose my sisters felt the same way. No, it was believable, and there's a comfort in it. You know, you know what you think you understand what God's purpose is with creation, and you learn more about it. It's an anchor sure and steadfast, no question about it. And if you recognize that, now when I was a kid, you know, like the biblical verse, when you're a child, you think as a child, you act as a child. And I was a child, I did childish things, but the truth always made sense to me, and it was something that I just gravitated to. I wasn't the perfect child by any stretch of the imagination. I did childish things and got into trouble, but I knew that there were things expected of me. And
Yeah.
my dad was very good at making sure we knew what he expected of us. And he was not harsh. He was not, anything like that. He just had expectations, and they were very faithful about us getting together as a family and doing our daily readings. And while you're going through that, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but this is where the wisdom of experience. You look back on that and you realize how instrumental that was in forming who I became. And so I never had any notion that there was any other option. Now, I didn't come into the truth because I felt like I was resigned to. I wanted to, but growing up, it was presented. That's what your life is going to be. You're a child of believers, and we're going to teach you what we believe. You're going to learn more about it, and it always made sense to me. I always saw the value in it, and so I never entertained any other option.
So it's
It
kind of
was
like,
just
what you're saying reminds me of like what, Peter told Christ, and Christ told, I think it was Peter, he said, are you guys going to leave me too? And then they said, Lord, where else would we go? There's
where
nowhere
would we
else
go?
to go but you,
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Um, but we were talking a little bit about, before you're baptized, you grew up knowing the truth, you're in school, all that kind of stuff like that. Um, Tell me about like how you manifested and handled some of the difficulties of that in school when you're younger, because especially when you're young and in school, the whole pressure is to be the cool groups, to conform, and
Right.
especially when you've got these school systems that are built on like patriotism. I remember I mentioned like the first time they were started doing the Pledge of Allegiance and I didn't do it, there were some pressures with that. How did you navigate that? What was that time of life like for you?
Well, I think uh, I'm not saying I'm really a unique person, but I tend to be on the loner side. I've always been happy just with myself. I never needed a group of people, or would never wanted to be a group, part of a group. And I think that a lot of people look at that and say, well, you need to be more sociable. You need to be more approachable. You need to be, but I credit that to answer the question you're asking. I didn't yield to peer pressure. Peer pressure had no effect on me. You don't like me? Oh, well, so I don't give you a reason not to like me, but if you just don't like me because I'm a goody goody two shoes or something, oh, well, that's not going to crush me. It didn't bother me. If I can't be a part of your group or you don't want me hanging around with you, that's fine. I didn't miss it because I didn't crave it. And
Yeah.
so I think that persona, I like solitude, and I think that kind of assisted me. And so, yeah, it can be a bad thing. You can be a problem for you in some circumstances. But as a child growing up, I think that's what kept me in the straight and narrow,
Yeah.
because I wasn't going to yield to peer pressure. Whatever you guys think, if you feel comfortable doing what you're doing, fine. But they would invite me, try to entice me to do things with them, and I knew they were wrong. And so I wasn't going to yield to it just because I wanted them to admire me or like, because that part really didn't matter. If you like me, great. If you don't like me, oh well.
Yeah.
So
And part of
I
that
had to
could be
find.
just your personality, or it may be just a mixture of having grown up in the truth, knowing kind of like, I remember hearing all the time that we would read the passage from The Christ is saying, hey, if they hate me, they're gonna hate you. You know, like, you shouldn't expect to fit in with everybody, you know.
No, the motivation was because of the truth. But what made it easy for me was the fact that I am that kind of a person. It didn't matter. Peer pressure wasn't going to affect me one way, the wrong way. I was going to do what I was going to do, whether they liked me or not. If they liked me, fine. If they didn't, again, oh well. I didn't care. So it was an asset for me. Some people would look at that as saying, well, yeah, but that kind of leaves you unapproachable and things. No, I'm not unapproachable. I'm very capable of being social, but it was relevant. It was relevant in keeping me from following the crowd. I wasn't a jock. I wasn't an egghead. I wasn't the party guy. I just me. And I had friends and they respected it. They didn't understand it, but they respected it.
Hmm.
And things that I could join in on without having a guilty conscience about it, I did. I had good close friends. We camped, fished, hunted, knocked around in the mountains together. But when they got old enough to drive and they wanted to go out and build a big bonfire and what we used to call them woodsies, and bring the alcohol with them and have a whale of a time, then I back out.
Yeah.
And they knew why, and they didn't hold it against me. So yeah, I just never had that problem. I never felt conspicuous
Mhm.
about refusing to join in on things that I knew was inappropriate.
Well, you were telling me you had a assignment or something, right, about patriotism. Share that story. What was that again?
Yeah,
What,
well, I was taking an American government class. I was a senior, and we walked into the classroom one morning, and the teacher addressed all the boys in the class. He says, "In the next 2 weeks, it would take 2 weeks to do a presentation every day." And he says, in the next 2 weeks, I want all of you boys, you're going to be called on to come up in front of the class and tell us how you intend to fulfill your military obligation. So when it was my time, being a W, I was one of the last ones to get up and speak because he took them in alphabetical order. So I stood up and told him what my position was on fighting and conscientious objection. And I said, I will not, and it is citizenship. We talked about that earlier. You're right.
yeah.
The whole thing about us is our citizenship. And I explained that to them too. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to file as a conscientious objector and I'll do my alternate service. And so, and he was obviously not real happy with my presentation. The looks, he wouldn't look at me while I was talking. And afterwards he said, well, at least we know where he stands. Mission accomplished. That's what I wanted you to do, to
Yep.
understand where I stood.
Yeah.
So, you face challenge. And then I had one guy, he was a year behind me in high school, and he was always trying to get me to fight. And he knew that I wouldn't. So that emboldened him to come up and be even more aggressive about it. And my friends, the group of friends that I hung out with, he always had his little groupies with him. And they'd come up to me and say, Mike, don't worry about those guys. We'll take care of them. If they try to get involved, we'll take care of them. I said, no, you guys, you know how I feel. I've got no reason to fight the guy. It doesn't make sense to fight him. And it goes against my beliefs. Just don't do those things.
Hmm.
And so anyway, yeah, school offers a lot of challenges that way.
Well,
I
did you have
mean,
any other students like come up and talk to you about any of your like your presentation at all, or just your position on things, or was it
no,
just they accepted it and like, okay,
they just accepted it. And no, not from that. I had other students at various times come up and ask me about my beliefs. We grew up in the community we grew up in. It was either Mormon or Catholic. I mean, those were the two dominant religions in that area. The Mormons, go to war, and so do the Catholics. Although the Mormons have their missionary work that they do, that sometimes they don't uh, go to into the army, but they're not against it. No, nobody from that class, from that presentation, asked me anything.
hmm,
They just accepted it and moved on, and I never heard anybody insult me over it or come up and say, "Boy, you're one of those cowards, aren't you?" Nobody challenged me on anything.
yeah. And like the first experience I had with that was, when I was in grade school, like young school. I mean, we're always taught you're to be respectful because we are blessed to live in a place where we can believe, and we're not being persecuted for it. So we need to be grateful for that. But that doesn't mean we're patriotic and we're, hey, this is our country
No,
and all that. We're
no,
we're not full citizens here. It's in the age to come. But at the same time, the way I was raised, and I think this is a good position. Is whenever the Pledge of Allegiance. That was something we always did in school. In grade school, I don't remember anybody asking me why I wasn't putting my hand on my heart or saying it. Usually I would just, stand upright, straight. If I had a hat, take it off, hold my hands at my waist or something that's, you're showing respect where you're not just on your phone or something. But
right,
also I'm not pledging my allegiance to a nation because
no,
my
no,
allegiance alone goes to God.
right,
But the first time, I think it was seventh or eighth grade, again, it was a history class, kind of like you were in, and this very, very patriotic teacher. Every day in his class specifically, we would start the class by doing that, and I didn't on the first day. And he was kind of an intimidating guy,
hmm,
and I kind of felt like, oh, what am I thinking of? I felt kind of singled out, and I think I was probably more susceptible to the being a little bit more fearful than maybe you were, but I wouldn't put my hand on it, and he actually pulled me out in the hallway and had a conversation. I was kind of nervous, but I said, "Here's my position," and I mean, I kind of like your teacher. He didn't like it, but he respected it, and he just said, just don't disrupt, and after that no problems forever, after that. But it was kind of a trying thing, but it's just making sure you're like you were saying earlier, your actions are consistent with what you're saying, you know.
right, right.
Um,
Well, back in that day too, Tanner, society was different. The social climate's altogether different, and I hope the audience who views this will forgive me, but I grew up in the era when people were marching in the streets with signs saying, "Hell no, I won't go." Now that's not who I am. I'm not a protester. I didn't have the long hair and the hippie look and protesting everything. I didn't have, and so you said, well, if I file as a conscientious objector, I'm not opposed to doing my alternate service because I'm not these guys over here marching down the street with those signs, and protesting everything. They were protesting everything there was to protest. So you wanted to separate yourself from that identity, but at the same time, you had to make your stand. So that's why I said, my lottery number was high enough they couldn't have drafted me, but I didn't know that until I was almost through the process when that first came in. So I just went ahead and volunteered to do my alternate service, and I'm glad I did.
yeah.
Now it's behind me, and
How old were you when you were baptized, and how did you know that you were ready
um,
for that?
well, it was just a matter of time. I actually got baptized while I was doing my CO work. And that was my choice. I didn't want to get baptized too young. I thought, well, I just didn't think that was wise because young people face a lot more challenges sometimes, even though I think I had the right personality to do it. But anyway, I had come back from camp on leave. We used to get vacation time. There was a couple of days here and there, but I had come back and it was in May, and I think it was 1972. Might have been 71 or 73, but I think it was 72. So we came back and we had a cabin up in the mountains. Um, and it was in a canyon, the Caneos Canyon. Caneos is Spanish for rabbit. And Dad had built a cabin up there. Your great grandpa, Uncle James, had helped build the cabin, and
Hmm.
Tommy Washeck had helped build it. So anyway, we were up there, and I told Dad I wanted to be baptized. So he and Pete were both there. So they interviewed me, and that was in May when the spring runoff in Colorado. Spring comes a little later than it does because we're at 7,600 feet where we lived, and up at the cabin it was close to 10,000. So anyway, yeah, the spring runoff was in full force. So the river was high and fast. So we did the interview, and then Dad and I got into the river, hoping we wouldn't get swept away. And he baptized me in the river. And then after that, I went back to California. So I did 6 months in Denver and then a year and a half in California and finished up my CO work.
So you
But I was
just
home on break.
So and yeah, it's just an important thing because like I remember I was baptized I think when I was 18. I just got out of high school. It was shortly after the New Mexico Bible School that year. But I had a similar thinking as I thought, I always assumed when I was younger, and that when I get into high school, when I hit a certain sort of teenage, I was just miraculously going to become some rebellious partying teenager. Like I'm not going to be able to handle. I'm going to be a totally different person, and
Right, right.
I'm still mentally the same exact person. But I didn't want to get baptized too young, and then not really and underestimate what trials were ahead of me and get into something that I
Right,
wasn't fully ready for.
right.
But at the same time, you never fully, you're not going to be perfect, you know. Um, so I guess what was it that like why then? Why did you wait to get baptized then? How did you know this is the time I need to do this, or is it just came on you?
Well, it wasn't a conversion because, like I say, I believed it all my life. I think it was doing my CO work. You know, if you're going to make the commitment to take that stand and do
Hmm.
your service, your alternate service, then what's holding you up?
Yeah.
So it was more just a me coming to a decision in my mind that the time's right. You know, I looked at the type of Israel too. You know, if you were 19 and younger, you weren't part of the fighting force. It seems like in the scripture at 19 is when you changed. Well, I would have been 20. And I thought, well, you know, I can't really put it off. There's no reason to put it off. But I'm at an age now, I'm committed myself to doing my CO work. You know, I'm already living, like I told you earlier, you have to live the life. You got to be what you claim to be. I did that all my life growing up. So it was just, I don't know, just the decision came on me. It was never a question of if I would be baptized. It was just a question of what's the right time.
Yeah.
And I was in the middle of doing my CO work, so it seemed like the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Why put it off any longer?
Especially if you're already making, you know, significant life decisions in light of that.
Right.
Like, hey, I'm devoting I'm not doing this because I believe this. And also too, I mean, when we're baptized, that's when I think, there's a verse that talks about we'll be judged according to the things we've done in the body or in his body. And I think sometimes people use that like the things that you've done in your person, but I think it's referring to the things you've done in the body of Christ. Like when you come into the body of Christ, those are the things that we're judged for because that's when our
Mm-hmm.
probation and our citizenship or not citizenship, but our what's the word? We'll use probation begins, So it's for the things that were done after that period that we're judged for, and good and wicked works behind us, they're behind
Mm-hmm.
us. So if you're living a life that's in line with what Christ teaches, in order for it to be on our record, at least as far as the judgment seat goes, you're going to be in covenant. Um, but that's an important thing. Like I shared with you, like when I was telling my grandpa, I was thinking about baptism. The question he asked me was, "What do you have to change? What do you feel like you need to do differently?" And the angle with that was, are you are you planning to make any big life changes after you're baptized, or are you already living as if you are like you believe these things? So, um, I want to ask you like, so I'm assuming there wasn't much difference in your life after baptism, or
No,
it's just
no,
gonna continue on.
no, no. It was just I finally just got to that point where it just didn't make sense not to be baptized.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, what kind of role models did you have in your life, both living and were there any pioneer works that were kind of instrumental in your
oh
growth
yeah.
to the truth, or tell me about
Oh
that?
yeah, yeah. I read Elpis Israel. I think, and I not only did I read it through, but I also used it as a reference for a lot of my thinking. I'd go back and research again what Brother Thomas had said. I think that's one thing that I'm concerned about. I don't know that young people are reading those books, and they really do lay a good foundation. Now, do I agree with everything Brother Thomas wrote? No, not necessarily 100%. I think he had the truth, certainly, but doesn't mean that I was reading to take his thoughts and make them my own. But it was a tutorial. It was instructive to me, and it made me really realize how when you read that book and World's Redemption and others, it makes you realize that this really is a concrete thing. It's not just your Sunday school teachers talking to you and your parents talking to you. You see that there have been other people that saw the value in this, and it just kind of reinforces your belief that this is valid. What I was raised to believe and what others have believed is valid. and the evidence. Brother Thomas, I think, was a gifted writer. I mean, I think he had the ability to really inspire and point things out in a way that you may not have thought about before. So I found it to be very faith building, and I had read that. I took that book with me to camp when I was fighting fires,
Hmm.
and I used to read it on the bus because we'd be on the bus for long hours, going, coming and going. And I read that book again. I think that was the second time I read through it. And I think that's another factor that made me think, well, this, why am I putting off being baptized? There's no reason for it. I'm 20. I'm certainly old enough. I certainly have enough maturity to know how I should live my life now. And I've already made decisions that were pretty vital decisions to be a CO and to, follow up on that and take the taunts and all of that. So it really just didn't make sense for me not to be baptized. I can't tell you exactly what moment, that the inspiration came on me, but it just was a progression of things. But no, I think if young people
Uh-oh.
have a lot of inspiration, if you don't read some of those pioneer works, I think they're very valuable in building. They're very faith building to me. I hope young people are still reading them, or
Yeah, I think it just lost connection for a second. What last thing I heard you say was I forget exactly what it was. So I guess, and I wanted to follow up with this anyways. So you would recommend reading like Elpis Israel. What specific works would you recommend to someone who's wanting to learn more about the truth, get a good foundation, and what advice do you have for them with those things? Like, hey, read this book, but keep this in mind, or make sure you look at it this way, or
well, I wouldn't go so far as to tell them how to think Elpis Israel. One of the complaints I would get from young people is, well, we don't, he uses words that I don't understand. I said, well, you ever heard of a dictionary? Pull out a dictionary, have it there.
exactly, yeah,
Expand your horizons a little bit. Learn to speak more eloquently. Our language has been dumbed down like a lot of things in society has been. They were more eloquent back then. They had a better vocabulary. We'll learn it. That's no excuse for not reading those books. But I
yeah,
would put Elpis Israel, and then Brother John Peake wrote a pamphlet called "What Is Truth," and I thought that's an excellent pamphlet. I reread that one quite often. But World's Redemption, Law of Moses, all the old standard books that
mhm.
every Christadelphian has in their library is a good place to start. It helps you, what you hear growing up is mostly from your mom and dad, from your teachers at meeting and so forth, and the brothers that you hear exhort if you're in an ecclesia. It's nice to get a different perspective, and I think I became a lot better reader, and my comprehension jumped up quite a bit by reading those books because they are challenging. They wrote in that Victorian style, and they use words that we don't even aren't even in our vocabulary anymore. But yeah, so I'd always tell the kids, well, just get a dictionary and look it up.
Yeah,
That's
Google. I mean,
why
you
they
just
make
Google it
dictionaries.
now.
Yeah, there's
I
no
remember.
excuse.
Yeah, I had, and that I guess that's kind of what I was meaning because that's you know, some of the we kind of joke sometimes reading Elpis Israel or something that there's a paragraph that's 3 pages long and it's all one sentence, But
Yeah,
I mean, it
yeah.
is written in terms that we're not used to reading, but
Right.
it's there. We can understand it. We just need to have the back of our mind and kind of the patience to okay, it's going to take me just a little longer to get this than had somebody wrote it today, but the message is still there and we can get it easy. We just have to look into it and we can figure out what words mean pretty easily now.
Well, everybody wants to read the Cliff Notes version. Just give me the Cliff Notes. I don't want to sit down and read this long book, and I don't understand half the words he uses in there. Well, that's no excuse. I'm sorry. If you're looking for sympathy from me, you're not going to get it. It takes
Yeah,
a
this is
little
the
work.
scriptures.
It
It's
takes a
the
little
truth.
effort. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, I want to ask, in your walk, because you were baptized when you were 20, right?
Right.
Looking back, has there been what's been the most beneficial to your walk? Is there a habit you've had or something you've studied or a verse you've always like what's been really beneficial to you when you just look back on your years in the truth?
Well, just the consistency of commitment. I mean, everybody has their highs and lows in life. You have times when your spirit is weak and you feel like, man, I'm kind of losing touch here with things. And then you go through those ups and downs in your life, whether it's in your work and your faith, in a lot of different things. I don't really have an answer for that. Because I was oriented towards it at such a young age, it was who I was.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, I had my times when I was a little weaker in faith than I was at other times, but never to the point where I thought about, I'm just giving this up. I can't do this anymore. I can't live this life, and I'm just struggling too much. It never occurred to me. And again, because I'm not subject to peer pressure, even the people I worked with, in my jobs, they would always want to talk about it. When they knew what I believed, they'd want to talk about it, and I talked to them. And I don't know, I just never felt like it was something that I could ever walk away from.
Yeah.
Once you know this, how can you walk away from it? To me, that just doesn't make sense.
Well, I guess like, did you have like Bible schools that were beneficial to you, or like did you have a reading plan that you stuck with, or is it just just walking as best as you can?
I think it was just a discipline that Dad taught us about the importance of reading and going to Bible school. Yeah, as I've gotten older, I do my daily readings, but I don't follow the Roberts plan anymore because I find it too stressful. If you miss a day, now you're reading just to stay caught up instead of reading for the benefit of reading. So I follow my own plan, and I read through the Bible. It takes me 14 months on my plan instead of 12, but certain portions of the Bible I read 3 to 4 times in a year. I break it up into different segments. And my favorite portion is from Proverbs through Ecclesiastes. I could sit and as soon as I finish it, I start right back at Psalms 1, read through it again, and I'm always and then I have other sections that I read that way. But I read through the whole Bible in about 14 months
Well, you've got
because
one that works for you though. That's the important thing. Like
that's it.
there's
Yeah,
different right reading things. I mean, yeah, and I've heard some brethren say it'd be great if we were all on the same reading plan that way. And which, in concept would be good because we could talk about, hey, this verse, this, we were just readings yesterday or something. But the most important thing is that we're each gathering our daily bread as as the kind of the figure of the manna is. Some gathered a lot, some gathered some, but they all gathered enough for
right,
what they needed.
right.
Um,
Well, and by the time you get to be my age, if you've been faithful in your reading, I don't know where they are on the Roberts reading plan, but I'm going to be familiar with the passage.
yeah,
If you want to, I don't have to sit down and read it 5 minutes before you want to talk about it.
yeah,
I've read through my Bible enough. I know it. It's just so anyway. Yeah, I found that too stressful, especially as kids. We'd go to Arkansas for a week, and we didn't do our daily reading in Arkansas because we were kids, having fun at the Bible school and all. And we'd get back home, and now we had to catch up. And I thought that was a disincentive.
mhm,
Sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes we'd just pick up where we, on that day and continue forward. But I just always found it kind of not workable for me, kind of stressful.
yeah,
Because if I'm not in the mood, if I'm distracted by something else going on, I could do my daily reading and couldn't tell you what I read.
yeah.
So I'd rather read when my mind's focused on it and follow my own course. And I still get through the Bible every 13 to 14 months. So
Yeah, you've
that's
got
the
something that
important.
works for you, and it's helping you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, when kind of coming to the present day here, what would you say is having all these years of experience and seeing the governments and the world and all that, the greatest proof that Christ's return is actually near?
Well, I think it's just the fact that the world's right on the precipice of just total destruction. Nations are falling. The society is I don't know how it could get any more decrepit. I mean, if we're not in the days of Noah or the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, I don't know how much worse it'd have to get. I don't know how it could get any worse because I've lived long enough, born in 1952. I've lived long enough to see how society has changed in the 72 years I've been alive, and it's gotten progressively worse. About the time you think it couldn't get any worse, it did, and I'm sure it could get worse than what it is now. But I don't one of the things I don't like to do is prophesy. I don't like to predict what I think when Christ is going to return. He'll return when he returns,
Hmm.
and his return is comes at the moment I draw my last breath. So what difference does it when we're not going to win a prize for guessing the right date? I don't worry about that so much. I know a lot of people, and I'm not condemning it. I'm just saying that that's not my attention is on today and what am I doing today and what did I do wrong today that I need to work on and things like that. And but I think if you ask me, I think we're very near to the return of Christ. I just don't know how it could get any worse at this point.
Yeah.
It's getting worse to the point of being dangerous. I mean, we live in a world now where it's getting more dangerous day by day. And I think the only thing I would expect that could happen is that we as believers might come under some sort of, I'll use the word persecution. I don't think we're going to be fed to the lions, but I think we could come under some pretty severe, abuse from society prior to the Lord's return. But in terms of world events, it seems like we're right at the end of what we expected to see happen prior to Christ's return. We're in the thick middle of it anyway.
Yeah.
And but I try not to prophesy. That can shake the faith of people too easily, and I try not to do that. But
Yeah, I think to borrow the phrase that I think is commonly used, we know the season of his coming, not the day of
right,
his coming necessarily.
right,
And
right,
we're given descriptions of what the world will be like when he comes, like you say, Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's not anything else that those are perfect descriptors of our day. It's possible that things could get even worse and they fit even more, but they do describe our day. So there's not any reason that he can't come soon.
right,
But we also, we're not told the exact day or hour for a reason. So, but I
right.
think the thing you mentioned is really the key to it all, and the key to the mindset too is, Christ could come, you know, in 50 or 100 year, it doesn't matter. For our from our perspective, it's when we give our last breath, which could be, if I'm 27 right now, theoretically I could have another 30, 40, 50 years. But that's assuming everything goes without any hitch. I get in a car accident tomorrow, and
Mm-hmm.
that's so, like you say, it's looking at it as a day at a time, and instead of trying to figure out when's he coming and when do I need to start. 'Cause I think that's a question that is kind of the root of the thought that's the root of the question is like, well, when do I really need to start taking things seriously and acting in accordance?
Mm-hmm.
Which if that's the problem, if that's why we're trying to figure out when Christ returns, we've got bigger problems we need to figure
Dude,
out.
yeah, I agree with that. You need to adjust the thinking a little bit on that for sure.
Um, but thinking of the kingdom age, what are you looking forward to in the kingdom, and why? Are there any individuals you're looking forward to meeting, or any aspects of the kingdom you're excited to see how that plays out or what it looks like? Or
I've tossed that idea in my mind. The way I explain it to myself is I don't have an artist's vision. I don't have an artist's eye. I can't draw anything. I'm not an artist. And so I try to envision things in my mind and I just can't. I don't have that. People that are artists, they see things in their mind and they have clear pictures of the painting they're going to do and they see things in detail. I don't have that talent. And so I sit and I try to contemplate what the kingdom's going to be like, and I just don't have any luck with that. So I don't worry so much about. I'm more worried about whether I'm going to be there than
Mhm.
what is it going to be like. But I have in my mind I've played around with, well, if the Lord gave me a choice of jobs to do in the kingdom, what would I like? What would I like to do? And there's it's hard because I think the kingdom is going to be a functioning kingdom. I guess one of the things that I focus on in a lot of my exhortations is how important it is to obey God's law. And he's very jealous for his law, and I don't like when I see things that look like we're taking liberties with it.
Mhm.
I think the law, God says what he means, and he means what he says. And when we start taking liberties with it, and we say, "Well, we think it means this," instead of that, I think that's not a smart move. And so I guess I look. I would like to be involved with the enforcement of the law. For instance, we're not policemen in our current day and age. That'd be an inappropriate job, but that still small voice. This is the way, walk ye in it. I can see myself being that voice.
Hmm.
Kind of sounds silly, but no, I don't know. I'm not a leader of men. I never was. I'm so I'm so independent, I guess. Like I told you, I'm not a groupie. I'm kind of a loner kind of attitude, and I don't know what job I would be fit for. Sometimes I think about nature, and I think, well, hey, I wouldn't mind being the guy that goes up and cleans up the mess left over from all of the wars and everything that's going on. Restore the earth to its beauty, and
Hmm.
or be in charge of that, or be a participant in creating the earth and restoring it to the Garden of Eden type of state. I could see myself involved in that, but no, I just don't have an artist's vision. I every time I try to think about, well, what is the kingdom going to be like? I just draw a blank.
Yeah.
I just have to go by what the Bible says, and I know it's going to be, a wonderful thing. So I leave it at that pretty much.
Yeah, we have a lot of things that help us understand what it's going to be like, but we don't have to have this perfect image of the daily life in the kingdom in
No,
order for this to be something to latch on to. I mean, we know it's deliverance from this current state of corruption and things like that, and we won't have sin in our members and all the things that that means. But too, like you mentioned, not being a leader of men, and there's going to be a change of the spiritual nature too. And I think we're obviously going to be enabled to do things that we can't do now. Now, what exactly that means, that's Christ's job to do that. I
yeah,
mean, was it his disciples asked him, we want to sit on your right hand, and Christ said, I forget exactly what the exact words were, but something to the effect of, that's not mine to give,
right,
at least not at that point. But uh, our roles are going to be distributed by Christ in whatever way he sees us to be the most effective. And it might be something that's totally out. I mean, you look at Moses, like when God called Moses, he said, I'm not the guy for this.
right.
He was quickened for it. So we don't know. That's part of the excitement of it is what are we going to be doing?
Well,
Um,
God, we're told in the Bible that secret things belong to God. But I would love to hear about the past. Anything He chooses to reveal to me, I'd be I'd be just captivated by that. But secret things belong to God, and I think there are things about His origin or His past and His history that it's not needful for us to know. But
mhm.
anything, along those lines, it'd be fun to talk to a believer from the past, an Abraham or a David or a Paul, and sit down and have conversations with them about the kind of things they had to deal with. And we know what's recorded in Scripture, but their life was a lot more than what's recorded. It'd
Mhm.
be fun to sit and listen to that. But no, I'll just be happy to be there if I'm there and content with whatever. It's like David, I'd be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord. That'd be fine. I'm not aspiring to any great position or anything like that.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm answering your questions in the
No,
way
no,
that
that's
you
perfect. I
hoped I
mean, and
would.
there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but there's different
Right.
things that motivate different people. Um, Now I want to kind of turn our direction, like, let's assume the household goes on 10, 20, 30 something more years. You know, what do you what are your concerns, I guess, for the unamended body as we look to the future, maybe for the elders that exist now and the youth that are going to be kind of taking the reins as time goes on? Are there any big changes you kind of foresee coming up in any way we can, and the role people can play to help ensure that the future is as bright as possible,
I
since this is
think,
gone.
well, I don't know how strong our spirit of resolve and survival is. I mean, when you look back, my grandparents were born in 1892, and they saw from the horse and buggy age all the way up to the space age, and they knew what real life was about. I mean, life was hard. I think we've lost a lot of that resiliency, and I worry about how strong people will be if they're challenged in severe ways. Do we have the personal commitment and resolve to forbear things that might come on us? I see us as becoming, well, I may get a lot of emails or phone calls, but I don't want to see us evolve into a church
Hmm.
jumping up out of our seats and saying, "Praise the Lord, Hallelujah."
Yeah.
I think the truth is more serious than that, and I don't know. I think I don't know if we have the resolve that we had even when I was growing up. I don't know if we have the forbearance of putting up with hard times. Our life has been so easy. If things got tough, I don't know how many people would be able to survive it. And there's no guarantee that it couldn't. I mean, if we can't have 2 showers a day and all the hot water we want, and we can't eat, all of the good things that we eat, if life got tough all of a sudden, I just wonder if people's faith is sufficient to carry them through.
Yeah.
I guess that'd be one of my concerns. I live, Pete and I both lived the kind of life where we lived in the wild, and we had to learn how to get by with what we had, and so we kind of have a little different take of it. I think we've gotten soft, not just physically but mentally soft, and I fear whether we could withstand the kind of things that the first century believers had to withstand.
So maybe
Um,
kind of spiritually soft as well, where I
yeah,
mean, I think all truth be told, we got a pretty cush life. We
we
could
do.
believe and do these things, but I don't think, and every individual's got their different case, but I don't think us as a household has been tried by fire anything like what previous generations have. Like we haven't had, I mean, in my lifetime, there hasn't been even a draft, so even if something like that comes up, you know, are, we say and believe these different things, but when fire comes, are we going to be able to withstand that or not? And it sounds like part of the concern that you're sharing is kind of the ways of the world creeping in too, where the body's becoming more like the churches and the world around us, and do you have any thoughts on how that's because what it's an important quote, I think it was Robert Roberts, that the truth is, it was recovered at a great expense, but if it's ever lost, it won't be lost all at once. It's one point at a time, one by one, till it's all gone. And I kind of see that in the same way of, well, not obviously just the truth, but just the standard of walk and the values that different ecclesias and Bible schools hold. Um, are there any signs that indicate that we are heading that direction? Things that have gone on in the household. Okay, well, this is kind of a red flag. We need to look at this, or
I think I see signs that way. I wouldn't want to speak of it on a public forum like this, but anybody who was curious, if they wanted to, ask me, well, more specifically, what do you mean by that?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we're getting soft, and you think about that in physical terms. You don't exercise, you don't do anything. You just sit around, and kind of turn into a slug. I think we're kind of that way spiritually to a degree. I think we're very good about uh, getting together and doing things, but I don't know how much of that is just social and how much of it is spiritual.
Mhm.
I think we're becoming more of a social type organization now. Again, if people disagree with me, I perfectly understand it. You're asking me, and
Yeah.
so I'm going to answer as me. I think we're becoming more of a social organization than a spiritual. And somebody wanted me to say, well, give me some examples. I could do that, but that'd be better done one on one than on a
Yeah.
forum like this. But I do have concerns. I think the truth is gradually, it doesn't take any courage to be a believer in today's age.
Mm.
Even not that standing up in front of the draft board or a classroom and telling, confessing your beliefs, that didn't take a lot of courage, but nobody even cares anymore. Society doesn't. As long as you leave them alone, they're willing to leave you alone, and you don't really have to make a stand on much of anything these days, unless you are summons, get a jury summons, or you have to make a stand based on your scriptural beliefs. But we're not really challenged that much. Nobody really cares.
Mhm.
At the worst, they might think, well, he's just one of those religious fanatics. But nobody wants to know what you believe. They don't care what you believe. We've and then even the signs, like I was telling you about the protesters that were popular in my day, marching down the streets and chanting, they're not going to do this, they're not going to do that. You still see some of that, but it's altogether different. It's not for a principle. People they're protesting because they want to become even more decrepit than what they already are. They want more decrepit freedom to be decrepit. Everything's just changed. It's hard to explain because you have to live through something, I guess, that time period. But I think a lot of people my age would know what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I think the truth is not as firmly fixed in us as it was back in the pioneer days. I think they really were devoted to it. And again, I'm speaking in general. Obviously, there are individuals in today's world that are just as devoted to it as they were back in Brother Thomas's day. I'm talking as a body. I just kind of see the whole thing just kind of getting a little softer, a little more accommodating.
Yeah.
You know,
There's this
um,
saying that if we think we're impervious to the ways of the world or the trends of the world, usually just means we're lagging a little bit behind. And I've even in my short life, I've witnessed that. Um, but so let's just I guess blanket it as becoming more spiritually soft and less vivacious in the truth. Or what kind of how do we fix that? Moving forward, what kind of things can we do as a body and maybe even as an individuals to help change the direction that things could be heading?
well, I think we got to get back to the basics. Even in my generation, we were taught right from wrong. You see people in today's world, Tanner, doing things that would not have been permitted. I mean, even in the truth, people getting more involved in political things, people getting more involved in social things. And I think we got to get back to the basics. We are a separate people. We are called out of this world to be a separate people. How do you separate yourself from the world? Well, not by emulating it, not by enjoying all of the. I'm not saying we need to become monks or become live an austere life. We can enjoy the blessings that God has given us, but we don't want to lose perspective. That those things are all temporal, and God blesses us as He sees fit, and it's a challenge to us to use His blessings in an appropriate manner. But I just don't know if I see the commitment to the truth that existed when I was younger. I told you my life story. I never entertained the idea of not coming into the truth. I wonder if you were to poll young people of today, what their answers would be on that. Because I don't see as many young people coming into the truth as once was.
Sure.
I think we all know of families where the kids just leave and never come back. That's always happened. But I see that in my mind, I think I see that accelerating and becoming even more common. And I think we're adopting some of the behaviors of the world that we shouldn't be adopting. And that's always been out there. It's always been an influence. I can remember being uh, told by my parents, you can't do those things. I know your classmates do that and neighborhood kids do that, but you can't do that. You've got to stay away from that kind of stuff. I hope parents are still telling their kids that, but the world is so much more seductive to the young people than it used to be too. There were things that were still taboo when I was growing up that society didn't even agree with. Now everything goes. There are no taboos.
Yeah.
You know, you just do what you want to do, and
Yeah,
there's
and
no.
it seems like that watering down effect of, you grew up where hey, this is what you do, this is what you don't, has crept in where clear, defined boundaries of right and wrong. I would say that seeped in to a significant degree. I mean, um, even just something that's simple as dress code at Bible schools, that's
Oh
changed
yeah,
over the years.
it
Because
has.
the world's definition of what's decent has changed, and therefore our definition is, which,
Well,
we're not to compare ourselves to the world as to what God expects of us. Um, and I had another thought that I can't. Oh man, it's gonna drive me nuts.
individually, those are all you people would say. Well, that's no big deal.
Yeah,
No, if you look at those things just individually, it's not. But collectively, it's made a change in our entire society
and their
and
effect over
and
time.
and Christadelphian society as well. I'm afraid.
Yeah. So I guess as far as how to help fix some of those things, get back to the word maybe being the word is the authority, regardless of what age we live in. If we're not trying to if we're not seeking eternal life, then we can do whatever we want, basically. But if we're in this race for eternal life and we want to be a part of the God's kingdom and the ages to follow that, whatever those look like, we have to do it by God's way. And God's way is this. And like you said, it's God's word. We can't start to water down the parts that we don't like. It's either His program or it's not. And
And I think that's the point. You've got to drive home how serious this is. The truth is a commitment, and living the truth is a commitment. And when it becomes just it's not even looked at as a commitment; it's just what you do. I came into the truth because I believed what I had been taught as a child, and I believed in the kingdom that would be set up on earth, and I believed in God's laws and His commandments that we're supposed to obey those things. And I think that's my recent talks and exhortations and things that I've people who hear me speak would attest to it. I think we're just getting away from how serious the laws of God are. Can you imagine? I'll give you an example. Remember the man who was picking up sticks on the Sabbath in the wilderness,
mhm.
and they put him in ward to find out what the Lord would speak about it? He said, take him out and stone him. Can you imagine that happening in a Christadelphian ecclesia today?
Mm.
Oh, no, 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 no. Well, you can't do that. He didn't know. He was poor guy.
It was
We'd
just
come up
picking
with
up
all,
sticks. That's all it was. It
he's
wasn't a
just
big
picking up
thing.
what
Yeah.
and when you go back and you read the law of Moses, there were no gray areas. It was pretty clear cut. And that man who went out and picked up sticks, yeah, you could argue, well, he wanted to cook his meal, and he probably was tied up the day before and couldn't get around to doing it. So he had to do it on the Sabbath, so he could fix his meal. What's wrong with that? Well, it's the same God. He said, thou shalt not. Well, we say, well, yeah, he says thou shalt not, but we can find ways to work around that if we, get creative enough. And he doesn't want us to suffer that way. God would want us to have that meal and fix it. We rationalize things,
It's
and
the
that's reflective of what the world's attitude
yeah.
is. And I
It's the
think
voice
that's
of the
my
serpent. Yeah. God said this, but
yeah.
that's the sin in our flesh
No,
talking.
we got to get back. It's God told him you'll do no work on the Sabbath day, and he violated that law, and the command was take him out and stone him.
Hmm.
Now it sounds pretty brutal, doesn't it? But I think that's the thing. We don't like the brutal side of the truth. It does demand things of us. It does require things of us.
Yeah.
And if we try to soften that somehow or amend it in some way, we're that just leads to nothing but bad.
Yeah. God is love, but He's also a consuming fire, and as He
Yep.
says, He'll be sanctified in those that draw near to Him.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
I think young people are particularly susceptible to that. And that's why, if getting back to the young people, they need to understand the goodness and severity of God. God is good, He's gracious, but He also has a severe side. And His expectations of people keeping His laws and commandments has not diminished at all. This is a serious thing. To walk in the truth is a very serious matter. And if we treat it as anything less than life and death serious, we're going to be subject to all kinds of bad influences and things like that. I think we need to get back to the little more. Well, you take the churches for instance. They used to preach when I was a kid. The apostate churches used to preach hellfire, brimstone, and damnation for sinners. They don't do that anymore. Now anything, we'll find a way to accommodate it. The old time preachers would get on TV and they pound on the podium, and that's what they were preaching. This is what's going to happen to sinners. They don't even teach it anymore.
yeah.
And I think those are the kind of influences that kind of work their way into our beliefs if we're not careful. We need to preach a little more hellfire, damnation, and brimstone, maybe.
Yeah.
We're getting away from that. And I think we need to get back to, no, I'm not saying become fanatical about it, but I think, we're letting the truth kind of evolve into something that I don't think it was ever intended to be. Now, are we well into it? No, I don't think we're well into it, but you ask me, what do I see on the horizon? That's where I see is kind of trending that way.
Yeah. teach the whole Bible. Not, I mean, I've heard it said, teach the Bible glad, not sad. Like, well, we're going to teach what it says because that's what we're
Right.
trying to
Yeah.
learn from it. But is there anything else you'd like to share as we kind of wrap up?
No, I think I've kind of been rambling a lot, but that's my nature. I hope people who watch the video can kind of figure out what I was trying to say and where I was going with it. But no, I think what you're doing, Tanner, is really valuable. And before you started recording, I'd like to say this again for the young people who may be watching, and that is that wisdom is not the result of biology. I'm 72, rounding the corner to 73. I'm not smarter or wiser because I'm 72. I'm wiser because I've lived a life, I've made mistakes, I've learned from experience. And that's why the counsel of the elders is always good to hear, especially for our young people, because they're growing up in a world where there are no boundaries anymore, or the boundaries are pretty scarce. And so it's good for them to hear about these things, about how life has changed over just the course of my lifetime, and it's going to continue to change until the Lord returns. But yeah, I think that's it. It's an important thing that you're doing, and I think it should be helpful to people who are serious minded about the truth and wanting to navigate through the world that they're living in, and how do I do this, and how do I stay true to my beliefs, and what's going to be required of me. Well, yeah, that's again where I talked about my loner personality. I was never subject to peer pressure, and I never had to go through that. Everybody wants to fit in. They want to be part of the group. They don't want to be thought of as the oddball, or, well, he's really weird, you don't want to hang out with him. Be who you are, and live what you claim to be, and be what you claim to be, and don't be ashamed of that. Stand up for the truth. Stand up for why you are different from everybody else. Don't be ashamed of that. Proclaim it, and let people know why you're not like everybody else. And and that's about all I can say, I guess.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up here. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Really do.